Welcome to English class. It's Miss Charity, and today we are going to be looking at English grammar. And the topic for today is adverbial clause. Our topic for today is adverbial clause. Now, our specific objectives are number one, you should be able to define adverbial clause. You should be able to define adverbial clause. Number two, you should be able to identify the markers that introduces adverbial clause. You should be able to identify the markers that introduces adverbial clauses. Number three, you should be able to identify 7 types of adverbial clauses and their functions. You should be able to identify 7 types of adverbial clauses and their functions. Number four, you should be able to give examples of the identified types of adverbial clauses. So, before we go into our number one specific objective for today, which is the definition of adverbial clause, let's just take our minds back to what a clause is. A clause is actually a group of words that has a subject and a verb which forms part of a sentence. It is a group of words that has a subject and a verb which forms part of a sentence. Now, we have 2 types of clauses. The first one is the independent clause. The independent clause. Now, the independent clause is also known as the main clause. It is known as the main clause. It can stand on its own, it can express a complete thought. It doesn't need to rely on any other clause to express a complete thought. The independent clause could also be said to be a simple sentence. Now, the second type of clause is the dependent clause. The dependent clause is also known as the subordinate clause, and from the name, dependent, it means it cannot stand on its own. It needs to rely, it needs to rest, it needs to depend on the independent clause to express a complete thought. Without an independent clause, the dependent clause cannot express a complete thought. Now, the dependent clause, which is also known as a subordinate clause, is divided into 3 types. We have the noun clause, we have the adjectival clause, and the adverbial clause. So today we are going to be looking at the adverbial clause. Now, what is an adverbial clause? An adverbial clause, from the word adverb. An adverbial clause is actually a group of words with a subject and a verb. It is a group of words with a subject and a verb which performs the function of an adverb. Now, what is an adverb? An adverb is a word that modifies. I want to believe we know what we mean by modifying. It tells more. It describes. It gives more information about a verb, an adjective, and other adverbs. Now, that is exactly what the adverbial clause does. The only difference being that the adverb is just a word, while the adverbial clause is a group of words, and those group of words must have a subject and a verb. But it also performs the same function as the adverb, so much so that it gives more information about the verb, the adjective, and the adverb in a sentence. Okay, now there are certain markers that introduce adverbial clauses. Adverbial clauses don't just occur. Remember, they are dependent clauses. Now, certain markers introduce them. What do I mean by certain markers? Certain words introduce these adverbial clauses. And those words that introduce adverbial clauses are known as subordinating conjunctions. Those words that introduce adverbial clauses are known as subordinating conjunctions. Now, we have so many, but some of them include because, although, as long as, so that, wherever, in order that, seeing that, before, after, and so on and so forth. The list is endless. You could actually look up some in your spare time. Okay, now let's look at the types of adverbial clauses. Number one adverbial clause we'll be looking at today is the adverbial clause of time. The adverbial clause of time. Now, time, what does it entail? It tells us when something happens. When something happens. That's all the adverbial clause of time does. It is a group of words. And don't forget, being that it is an adverbial clause, this group of words must contain a subject and a verb. And this subject and verb that is contained in this adverbial clause must tell us when an action occurred, when an action took place. Now, the adverbial clause of time is often introduced by subordinating conjunction such as when, whenever, since, as soon as, while, and so on and so forth. Now, we have examples. Example A says, a burglar entered the house while I was still sleeping. A burglar entered the house while I was still sleeping. Now, while I was sleeping, what does it tell us? It tells us about time. When did the burglar enter the house? The burglar entered while I was sleeping. Time. So, in that case, while I was sleeping is an adverbial clause of time that functions as the modifier of the verb entered. It is an adverbial clause of time that functions as the modifier of the verb entered. Okay, we have other examples. Example 2 says, I left the mall before my driver came. I left the mall before my driver came. When did you leave the mall? Before my driver came. Can we see the time there? Can we see how it shows time? When did you leave the mall? What time did you leave the mall? Before my driver came. So, before my driver came is the adverbial clause of time. And don't forget, the marker that introduced this particular clause is before. Before, that is the word, that is the subordinating conjunction that actually introduced this adverbial clause that we are looking at right now. So, it modifies the verb left. Okay, example C says, until there are no more books left to be read, I won't stop reading. You read a lot. When will you stop reading? Until there are no more books left to read. Until there are no more books left to be read, I won't stop reading. Can we see it? When will you stop reading? Until there are no more books left to be read, I won't stop reading. So it answers the question when, which means until there are no more books left to be read is an adverbial clause of time that modifies the verb stop. Okay, let's move over to our adverbial clause number 2. Adverbial clause number 2 is an adverbial clause of place. Adverbial clause of place. Now, place, where. So, in essence, this adverb or this adverbial clause actually tells us or gives us more information about where an action occurs or the position of something. It gives us more information about where an action occurred or the position of something. And it is introduced by such words as where, wherever, everywhere, anywhere, etc., etc. Okay, now let's look at some of the examples we have. We have example A here, which says, you can go wherever you want to go. You can go. You can decide to end it. You can go. But by adding wherever you want to go, it actually tells us where. It tells us about place. Anywhere at all. It is your choice. Just make up your mind. So, wherever you want to go is an adverbial phrase of place. and it modifies the verb go. Okay, example B says, I don't know where she has gone to. I don't know where she has gone to. Now, where she has gone to actually modifies the verb know. As you can see, where she has gone to actually tells us about place. Example C says, we met kind people everywhere we went. We met kind people everywhere we went. Where did you meet kind people? Everywhere we went. So, it talks about place. Okay, our third adverbial clause for today is the adverbial clause of manner. The adverbial clause of manner. Manner, it tells us how something happened, how an action is being performed, how the action occurred, how something is being done. In essence, the adverbial clause of manner actually answers the question, how? It answers the question, how? And it is introduced by such markers or words such as, like, and all what have you. Okay, let's look at some examples we've got here. Example A says, John passed his examination as we all expected him to do. He passed his examination as we all expected him to do. Now, as we all expected him to do is the adverbial clause of manner because it tells us how John passed his examination. How did John pass his examination? He didn't do less than we expected. He passed as we all expected. That was how he passed. Possibly we were expecting him to make all A's and he actually made all A's. That was how he passed. Okay, let's look at example 2. Example 2 says, I prayed like I had never prayed before. I prayed like I had never prayed before. Now, like I had never prayed before actually tells us the manner in which the person prayed. How did you pray? I prayed like I had never prayed before. That was how you prayed. That was the manner in which you prayed. So, like I had never prayed before is an adverbial clause of manner and it modifies the verb prayed. Okay, now let's look at a fourth adverbial clause for today, which is the adverbial clause of reason. The adverbial clause of reason. Now, from the word reason, you can easily tell that it has to do with why something happened. Why did you do something? Why was it done? Now, this adverbial clause actually is introduced by such words as because, since, that, saying that, and all what have you. Now, let's look at some of the examples we've got here. Example A says, the visiting team won the game because they had better players. The visiting team won the game because they had better players. Now, why did the visiting team win the game? They won because they had better players. That's the reason. That was why they won. So much so that if they didn't have better players, then they wouldn't have actually won the game. Hope we understand it. So, because they had better players, actually is the adverbial clause of reason and it modifies the verb won. It modifies the verb won. Now, let's look at other examples. Example 2 says, seeing that he was at the verge of being embarrassed, I had to help him. Seeing that he was at the verge of being embarrassed, I had to help him. Now, seeing that he was at the verge of being embarrassed is an adverbial clause of reason. That was why you helped him. If not because he was at the verge of being embarrassed, you wouldn't have helped him. So your reason for helping him is so that he won't be embarrassed. Which means, seeing that he was at the verge of being embarrassed is an adverbial clause of reason, which functions as a modifier of the verb help. Okay, example C says, since you refuse to budge, I have awarded the contract to your friend Nick. Since you refuse to budge, I have awarded the contract to your friend Nick. Now, let's look at that particular sentence. I awarded the contract to your friend Nick because he refused to budge. That was the reason I awarded the contract to your friend. If not, I wouldn't have awarded it to him. So, since he refused to budge in that sentence is our adverbial clause of reason and it functions as the modifier of the verb awarded. Okay, let's look at our adverbial clause number 5. We have adverbial clause of purpose. Adverbial clause of purpose. Now, the adverbial clause of purpose actually indicates the purpose for an action. It's confusing, right? Most times we confuse the adverbial clause of purpose with the adverbial clause of reason because they are so closely related, but they are different. It's just a very thin line that distinguishes them. Okay, let's look at the easiest way to distinguish between the two. The adverbial clause of purpose actually indicates something that is yet to happen. It has not yet happened. It is about to take place. It has not taken place yet. Something that would happen in the future. That is what the adverbial clause of purpose indicates. While the adverbial clause of reason actually indicates something that has already happened in the past. It has happened. Now, let's look at the example. Seeing that he was at the verge of being embarrassed, I had to help him. It's something that you've done. You're not about to do it. That is reason. Now, for purpose, let's look at some examples here. We have, they went to bed early. They went to bed early so that they would have the strength for the long journey the next day. That was why they went to bed early, so that they would have the strength for the long journey the next day. Note, they've not embarked on the journey yet. It's something that they're about to do. It's something that would happen. It has not happened. That is the difference. Reason, it has happened already, while purpose is yet to happen. So that they would have the strength for the long journey to the next day is the adverbial clause of purpose, and it functions as the modifier of the adjective early. That was why they went to bed early. They did not just go to bed, they went early. Okay, a second example says, the child wants to finish her assignment today in order that she will be free at the weekend. The child wants to finish her assignments today in order that she would be free at the weekend. Now, in order that she would be free at the weekend is actually the adverbial clause of purpose because that is why the child wants to finish her assignment. She has not finished the assignment. She is yet to finish the assignment. Now, that adverbial clause actually functions as a modifier of the verb finish. Okay, example C says, in order to reach him, you will have to wait for 5 minutes. You will have to wait for 5 minutes. You've not waited. It's something that you will have to do. Do you understand? So that is that. Now, let's look at the sixth adverbial clause we have for today, which is adverbial clause of condition. Adverbial clause of condition. Now, the adverbial clause of condition actually lays down a condition. It actually shows consequences for an action. It lays down a condition for something to be done. If you don't do this, this will not happen. Unless you do this, this will not happen. That is what the adverbial clause of condition does. Supposing you do this, this will be the result. It gives you a condition for something, and to a large extent, it brings out expected consequences of an action. Okay, let's look at some of the words that actually introduce adverbial clause of condition. We have if, we have providing that, we have unless, we have supposing, etc., etc. Okay, under our examples, the first one we have is you will definitely fail if you don't study. You will definitely fail if you don't study. If you don't study shows condition. If you don't study, this is what will happen. If you don't study, what will happen? You will definitely fail. So it gives you the consequences of an action. It gives you the condition, which means the condition for you not to fail is that you should do what? You should study. Now, if you don't study, actually modifies the verb fail. Okay, let's look at example 2. Example 2, or B rather, says that provided that you keep your mouth shut, provided that you keep your mouth shut, there will be no problem. Which means the condition for us not to have problems, the condition for everything to be fine and problem free is that you should keep your mouth shut. Which means if you don't keep your mouth shut, then there will definitely be what? Problems. So, provided that you keep your mouth shut is the adverbial clause of condition, and it modifies the verb phrase will be. Yeah. Okay. Example C says, until you get serious with your studies, I won't take you out anymore. So, what is the condition of taking you out? You have to get serious with your studies. Which means, if you don't get serious with your studies, then no more outings for you. So, not taking you out anymore is the consequences of not getting serious with your studies. Which means, until you get serious with your studies, is the adverbial clause of condition, and it modifies the verb take, or the verb phrase won't take rather. Okay, let's look at the seventh adverbial clause for today, which is the last, is the adverbial clause of concession. The adverbial clause of concession. Now, this clause actually suggests the opposite of the main clause. It suggests the opposite of the main clause, or it actually presents the main clause and the dependent clause to a large extent contradicts the main clause. It admits, it concedes to it. Now, the words that introduce this adverbial clause of concession are although, though, even though, while, whereas, etc., etc. Let's look at some of the examples we have here. Example A says, though he is poor, he is always neatly dressed. Though he is poor, he is always what? Neatly dressed. Now, if you look at that sentence, you would actually discover that poor people most times look tattered. But despite the fact that this man is poor, he is always neatly dressed. Do you understand? Because there is a wide assumption that people that actually dress neatly are people that are wealthy to an extent or are comfortable. Because the poor, to a large extent, don't have any means of livelihood. So, for a poor man to actually always dress neatly or always look neatly, it's actually something that should catch our fancy. That's why this example says, though he is poor, he is always neatly dressed. So, though he is poor is an adverbial clause of concession. It modifies the verb dressed. Okay, example B says, I will go even if you forbid me. I will go even if you forbid me. Even if you forbid me is the adverbial clause of concession. It modifies the verb go. I will go even if you forbid me. So whatever you want to do to me, you are on your own. It won't change the fact that I will go. Okay, let's look at the last example here. Example C. It says, whereas John had more enemies than friends, his brother was extremely popular. Whereas John had more enemies than friends, His brother was extremely popular. Do you see? Now it is expected that since we are brothers or I have siblings and my brother has enemies, I should also to a large extent have enemies. But no, rather I am popular. So to a large extent that is contradictory. Okay, so that is that for the adverbial clause and the types of adverbial clause. Feel free to ask your questions. We'll be having a Zoom class later today by 10 o'clock. Please endeavor to connect. You have my Zoom ID, you have the password. Please join and join on time. And feel free to ask your question. Feel free to make your contributions. Now, there is an assignment here. As usual, go to my Google Classroom platform, do the assignment and submit it. The notes would also be on the Google Classroom platform. Please copy the notes, copy the specific objectives as well. So, here is the assignment. Write out the grammatical names and functions of the following italicized clauses. We have 1 to 7. The italicized ones are actually the ones I expect you to take cognizance of. So you should be able to tell me the grammatical name, adverbial clause of place, adverbial clause of manner. That's what I mean by the grammatical name. And the function. Is it functioning as the modifier of the verb, whatever, modifier of the adjective, whatever, and all what have you. Now, number 8 assignment says differentiate between adverbial clause of purpose and adverbial clause of reason. So, I would be waiting for your assignment, and the assignment will be due on Wednesday, 12 noon. Please endeavor to turn it in and on time. No late submission. Do have a lovely day and keep staying safe. I love you guys.